Hello, thanks for watching this video about JavaScript. Today we're going to go on a whistle-stop tour of some of the fundamental features of the language and some of the things I wish I knew when I was first getting started. We're going to cover variables and the data types, strings, numbers, booleans, arrays, objects, but we're going to start off with something called console.log. Before we dive in, let's make sure that we've got our setup how we like it and ready to do some work. So if you look at the screen now, you'll see that on the right hand side over here, we've got my text editor open. I've got it open on a basic index HTML file. On the left hand side over here, we've got my command window, so my terminal. So if we list the contents there, you can see we've got a basic app.js, an app.css, and an index.html file in there. The only one we need to worry about today is app.js, and currently that is empty. So if we subl app.js, open that up in our terminal, you can see there's absolutely nothing in there. But what these are doing, the CSS file and the app.js file, is connecting to that index, and they're being opened in a browser window here. So on the right hand side, we've got the web inspector tools with the console open, and on the left hand side, we've got just that HTML page loaded in with that basic CSS. And if any of this is looking really confusing to you, if this is blowing your mind, you've never seen a console window before, you've never seen a text editor, then I'll refer you to my previous video, which kind of gives you a very, very brief introduction into my setup, but will give you a jumping off point to learning all of this so that it won't be quite so confusing. And you can see that video somewhere here, maybe? I hope that works. The first thing we're going to look at is something called console.log, and that looks a little bit like this, console.log, and then we'll say just a quick string in there, hello world, save that, and if we run that in our terminal, with node app.js, it prints out hello world to our terminal, and if we head over to our browser window, reload that page, we get hello world in the console of our browser also. So console.log might seem like a strange place to start when learning JavaScript, but it's what lets us see the results of our code. When I first started learning JavaScript, a lot of the examples I found were quite abstract, and they never really showed you how to get that code running in a real-world environment. That was never explained. So I'm assuming you already know how to type. So you could already just type out a basic string like hello world here, and you probably are already able to do simple arithmetic like 3 times 4 plus 5. You could do these things already. You don't need to learn that because it's already instinctive. What's less obvious is how to run those little bits of code in an environment where they're going to be useful. And that's where console.log comes in. So here we've got our expressions that we were just typing out there. And if we wrap these in console.log, so don't worry too much about the syntax of the dot and how it's working. We'll come to that later. But for now, we're just wrapping what we want to print out in parentheses that follow console.log. And you can see you can also nest parentheses and all sorts of stuff here. So if we save this code and run it, we would expect to see, what would we expect to see? We'd expect to see it say hello world, and then expect it to say 3 times 4 plus 5. But not to say that, to say the result of that. So we run that, there we go. Hello world is printed out, and it also says 17. Notice my mental arithmetic wasn't good enough to work that out on the fly, which is pretty poor, really. So by now you've probably picked up the fact that we are logging something to the console. And when we run our code in the terminal, the console is just the output of that file in the terminal. So we'll run that again just to show you. It's logging these bits of text into the terminal. If we head over to the browser, refresh the file, it's logging those into the console element. So if you open up your browser dev inspector tools, the first thing you'll see will be elements, and that's kind of basically the basic inspector section where you can go and highlight the things and inspect what's going on the page, but you can also look at a console, so you can see the results. So with our index.html file, writing some code inside a console.log statement, that's then going to be printing out in a real-world environment, sort of, but you can write code and you can run that code. Now, pretty quickly, our code is going to get a little too complicated to fit on a single line that fits inside a console.log statement. We're also likely going to want to reuse bits of our data throughout our program and pass it around from task to task. And it's all very well being able to calculate the result of an algorithm, but if we want to pass that result into a new calculation, how do we do that? Well, for that we have what are called variables. Now, variables are JavaScript's way of letting us store named references to bits of information. That's all they are. It's nothing too complicated. So rather than writing our string directly into our output, like this, we could, for example, say const message equals hello world. And then rather than outputting hello world directly, we can put message. There we go. Forgive the spelling. We can put message directly into our console.log, save that, run it, and it prints out exactly the same as it would normally. It's as if we typed hello world inside that message statement there. And we can combine variables as well. We could say intro hello, and then outro. That probably makes sense. And then we can combine them. So we could say intro plus, comma, plus, outro, plus, an exclamation mark. Save that, run it again, exactly the same result. And what we're doing here is outputting strings of text. So anything that's within quotes like this, or within double quotes, or even within backticks for template literals, there it's all considered strings, so a text value. And it could be anything we like with spaces and all sorts of weird characters and anything in there, but it's just going to treat that just the same as if it's just a string of text. So it's going to appear exactly as it appears there is how it will appear in the terminal window. So let's just prove that. See, our gibberish has just gone straight through unfiltered. It's not done anything to it. But other than strings, there are many different types of content that we can put into our variables. It doesn't have to be a string, it can be a number. And then it gets treated just the same. But it can also be things like booleans. So it could be true or false. And notice that these are reserved words. So if I was to say just an arbitrary word, as if we'd written a string of text and run that, we're going to get an error. It's going to say, oh no, look, it's thinking that arbitrary text we wrote there, because it's not in quote marks, it's thinking that is another variable, and that variable doesn't exist. So we could fix this by actually making that variable exist. See, it works, but that's not really what we're after. But if you notice, false as by itself is a reserved word, and so we can have false, we can have undefined, and we can have null. And these are all different ways of saying nothing exists here, and they all have their different uses, but they're not massively important at the very start. Just be aware that there are certain words that are reserved for specific uses. The next data type you need to know about in JavaScript is a little bit more complicated, and this is where we start to get into the more useful features of the language. This next one we're going to look at is an array, and arrays are marked by square brackets, and they are a list of values. So we could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In fact, let's clear this out to make it a bit clearer. Now it looks like that's just pulled out a string of stuff, but it isn't just a string, it's actually structured data. So this is an organized list of things. So we could make some more variables. Number equals let string equal some text, and let bool equal true. And we could then store these variables inside our array. And so if this was just outputting the raw text, we'd expect our log file to just log square bracket number string boolean. But in fact, what it's going to do is it's going to log out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, some text, and true. See? Now here I'm deliberately using different types of variable declaration. There's 3 that we need to know about. We've already seen const, which I've been using mostly, and now we've just introduced let. And there's also plain old boring var for variable. Equals. Now, var has been in JavaScript forever, and that's just a plain basic way of declaring a variable. Let and const are new, and one of the benefits of learning JavaScript today is you don't need to worry too much about all the old-fashioned stuff that's come before. We're just going to focus on the new, shiny amazingness, and they have subtle differences. So const, which stands for constant, means that you can only declare that name once. So if we were to now try and reassign variable to something else and change it to just some numbers, we run that, we're going to get an error. So here we go. We run that in the terminal, we're going to get an error. It's going to say, oops, you've already declared that. Assignment to constant variable. Let is more forgiving. We could run the same code with let instead of const. It works fine. If you've saved something with let, you can rename it as much as you can reassign it as much as you like. So if we've got our variable called bool for boolean, we could keep switching that between true and false just by saying bool equals false. Perfectly valid code. But if we were to use constant, then what we're doing by using const, by typing it out like that, is saying we don't want to have to we don't want to be able to redeclare this variable. This is solid. This is something that doesn't change, and it's very good for stopping you redeclaring the same. Because if you get a really long app, you might find yourself reusing the same numbers, the same names in different contexts, and that's not a good thing. That leads to bugs and unpredictability. So use const when you know you don't want that thing to change, and if you think it's going to change, then use let. And don't worry about var, because we don't need it anymore. We don't just have to output the whole array if we don't want to. We could just say we want to just output the string value here, the second one. Put a little square bracket and say which number we want. When you're counting in computers, you start at 0 rather than 1. So the second thing in this list is going to be number 1. So if we log that, it's just going to output some text. If we wanted to just get our Boolean value, that's the third thing in our list. So we could say index number 2, true. And if we just want the number, obviously we can do 0. And that's all well and good, but you have to output things, you have to know the order in which things were stored in an array. It'd be much more useful if we could just say, oh, we've got this arbitrary list of array of things, but I want the one that is the particular value I'm after, without having to know the exact order it was added into the array. And that's where objects come in handy. So in their simplest form, objects are very much like arrays, but each item has a name. So we can say first thing is the number, second thing is the string, and last thing is the Boolean. So now we run that code, and it's saying undefined because I've still got the array syntax in there. Take that out. We're just outputting now this object that we've made, a list of things. But rather than saying we want to get the first thing or the second thing, the third thing, we can call them by name. So we can say we want the second thing. Here I've got the variable name followed by a dot, followed by the name of the thing I'm after. Run that out. Boom, some text. Objects are one of the defining features of JavaScript. It might look, in this instance, very much like just a slightly fancier array, but it has a lot of power. The way that we can access things by just having dot and then the name of it, and we can pass these around. We can use these as the building blocks to build much more complicated things. One of the things that makes them powerful is that you can have anything as a value. You can have an array in there. You can have another object. You could have a function. And functions are the last bit of the puzzle. So if we've got numbers and strings and booleans and arrays and objects. The last one of those, which is a very fancy type of object, is called a function. And that's actually what lets us do things. And we're going to look at that some other time. Not now. Bye.